The rain fell in sheets across Dover's shattered waterfront, hammering against broken windows and pooling in craters that still smoked from the morning's bombardment. March 1944. The English Channel stretched grey and hostile beyond the cliffs, separating Britain from occupied Europe by 21 miles of cold water. 21 miles that felt like 21,000. Lieutenant Sarah Barnett stood in the doorway of what used to be a fisherman's warehouse, watching the bomb disposal team load another body onto a canvas stretcher. The third one this week. The man's hands were still intact. It was everything from the chest up that was gone. A Teller mine, probably. Or one of the newer S-mines the Germans had started scattering across the beaches like seeds of iron death. She was 26 years old. Her hands didn't shake anymore when she signed the death reports. Another one? Commander Phillips appeared beside her, his uniform soaked through, rain dripping from the brim of his cap. He was 53 and looked 70. 3 years of this war had carved lines into his face that wouldn't fade even if Britain won tomorrow. "Corporal Davies," Sarah said, her voice flat. "Stepped on something in Sector 7. Beach clearing operation." Phillips closed his eyes. Christ. He had 2 kids. 3, Sarah corrected quietly. The youngest is 4 months old. The commander pulled out a cigarette with trembling fingers, tried twice to light it in the wind before giving up. "We can't keep doing this. We're losing men faster than we can train them. The invasion's coming, everyone knows it, and these beaches are death traps. Every 100 yards, there's another mine. Teller mines, S-mines, Regal mines, improvised explosives rigged to detonate if you breathe on them wrong." Sarah watched the stretcher disappear into the back of an ambulance. The rain washed the blood from the cobblestones almost immediately, as if Corporal Davies had never existed at all. "The fuses," she said. "What?" "The German fuses. They're all photosensitive. Every single type they're using." Sarah turned to face him, and for the first time in hours there was something other than exhaustion in her eyes. The Teller mines, the S-mines, they all use variations of the same pressure-release mechanism with a light-sensitive backup trigger. It's elegant engineering. Diabolical, but elegant. Phillips stared at her. "Sarah, you're not making sense." "I am. I've been studying the schematics from intelligence. The mines we've recovered, the ones that didn't explode, they all have the same vulnerability. The photosensitive cells are designed to detect sudden changes in light. That's why they go off when you dig them up. The sunlight hits the sensor, and boom." "So what are you saying? We clear the beaches at night?" "We've tried that. Lost 8 men in 2 nights. Sarah shook her head, rain plastering her dark hair against her skull. "No. We don't clear them in darkness. We clear them in constant light. Steady, unwavering light that doesn't trigger the sensors because there's no change, no spike, no sudden exposure." The commander's cigarette hung forgotten between his fingers. That's insane." "It's physics," Sarah said. "And it might just work." Behind them, another truck rumbled up with supplies, sandbags, metal detectors, body bags. Always more body bags. The war ate men like a machine, grinding them up and spitting out widows and orphans and telegrams that began with "We regret to inform you." Phillips looked at her for a long moment. In her eyes, he saw something he hadn't seen in months. Not hope, exactly. Hope was for fools and children. But possibility. The ghost of a chance. "What do you need?" he asked. "Access to the engineering depot. 24 hours. And a mine. A live mine." "A live mine," she confirmed. "Preferably one that hasn't killed anyone yet." The rain intensified, turning the world into a blur of gray and black. Somewhere across the channel, in concrete bunkers and fortified positions, German soldiers were placing more mines. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. Rommel's Atlantic Wall stretched from Norway to Spain, and every inch of it was designed to kill. But Sarah Barnett had an idea. And in March 1944, with the invasion looming and the casualty lists growing longer every day, an idea was worth more than gold. "You'll get your mine," Phillips said. "God help us all." She nodded once, turned, and walked back into the rain. Behind her, the ambulance pulled away, carrying what remained of Corporal Davies back to a family that would never be whole again. The war had already taken so much. But tonight, in a warehouse that smelled of rust and cordite and fear, Sarah Barnett was going to try to take something back. The clock was ticking. The invasion was coming. And the beaches were still full of death. The engineering depot occupied a former brewery on the outskirts of Dover, its brick walls scarred with shrapnel and its windows covered with blackout curtains. Inside, under the harsh glare of electric bulbs, Sarah Barnett worked with a focus that bordered on obsession. 22 hours had passed since her conversation with Commander Phillips. 22 hours of no sleep, no food beyond stale tea and a sandwich she didn't remember eating. Her fingers were stained with grease and her uniform reeked of chemicals, but her mind was clear. Crystal clear. The mine sat on the workbench before her like a sleeping dragon. It was a Teller mine, the Teller Mine 42, to be precise. 11 pounds of TNT packed into a steel case the size of a dinner plate, with a pressure fuse so sensitive that 30 pounds of weight would trigger detonation. Enough explosive force to blow the track off a tank or reduce a human being to mist. The Germans had manufactured over 6 million of them. This one had been recovered from a beach near Calais by a French resistance cell and smuggled across the channel at God knew what cost. "You're mad," Sergeant Thomas Garrett said from the doorway. He was 41, built like a brick wall, with burn scars up his left arm from a mine that had detonated 3 seconds too early. He'd survived. His partner hadn't. Completely, certifiably mad. Sarah didn't look up from the wiring diagram spread across the table. "Then leave." "Can't." "Commander's orders. I'm here to make sure you don't blow us both to Kingdom Come." "Then be quiet and let me work." Garrett stepped closer, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He'd been defusing bombs since 1940, had survived the Blitz, had pulled more ordnance out of London buildings than any 3 men combined. But this was something else entirely. On the bench beside the mine sat Sarah's invention. It looked like madness given form. A modified hurricane lantern with the glass chimney removed and replaced with a cylindrical shade made from welded metal mesh. Inside, instead of a wick, she'd installed a series of small electric bulbs wired in parallel to a battery pack. The mesh shade was wrapped in layers of diffusion material, wax paper, thin cloth, even strips of parachute silk. "Walk me through it," Garrett said. "One more time." Sarah finally looked up. Her eyes were bloodshot, ringed with dark circles, but sharp. Always sharp. "The German photosensitive fuses work on differential light detection," she began, her voice hoarse. "They're designed to explode when suddenly exposed to daylight, when someone digs them up, when the sand shifts, when a shadow moves away. The sensor detects the rapid change in light levels and triggers the detonator." "Right. Which is why we can't dig them up during the day." "Exactly. But the key word is change. The sensor needs a spike, a differential. If the light level remains constant, if we bathe the mine in steady, unwavering light from the moment we start working on it, the sensor never detects a change worth triggering on." Garrett studied the strange lantern. "So this thing provides constant, diffused illumination," Sarah finished. "No flicker, no variance. We place it directly over the mine before we start excavation. The light penetrates down through the sand, hitting the sensor gradually. By the time we expose the mine completely, the sensor has been bathed in constant light for minutes. No spike, no trigger, no explosion. In theory." "In theory," Sarah agreed. "Which is why we're going to test it." She reached for a control box, another improvised contraption of switches and wires. With careful precision, she connected it to the tellermine's housing, bypassing the main charge but leaving the fuse mechanism active. If the sensor triggered, the control box would register it. The TNT wouldn't explode, but they'd know they'd failed. "If this works," Garrett said quietly, "you could save hundreds of lives. Thousands, maybe. If it doesn't work, I'll be lucky to save my own career." Sarah positioned the lantern above the mine, suspended on a makeshift stand. The diffused light spilled across the workbench in a soft, even glow. "Switch on the sensor." Garrett's hand hesitated over the control box. "Sarah." "Switch it on, Thomas." He threw the switch. The indicator light on the control box turned red. The mine sensor was now active, capable of triggering. One wrong move, one flash of light, and the control box would scream a warning. Sarah began piling sand over the mine, covering it completely until it looked like nothing, more than an innocent patch of beach floor. The lantern glowed above it, steady and unwavering. "Now we dig," she said. Her hands moved with surgical precision, removing sand grain by grain, working in a spiral pattern outward from the center. Garrett watched the control box like a hawk, his breath held, waiting for the red light to start flashing, the signal that the sensor had detected a change, that the mine was about to blow. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. The outline of the mine began to emerge from the sand, steel edges catching the diffused light. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she cleared the last layer of sand from the pressure plate. The mine lay fully exposed now, bathed in the constant glow of her improvised lantern. The control box remained silent. The red light steady. No trigger. "Jesus Christ," Garrett whispered. "It's working." Sarah sat back, her hands finally shaking now that the moment had passed. "It's working," she repeated, and something that might have been a laugh escaped her throat. "Thomas, it's actually working." Garrett moved closer, examining the setup with new eyes. "The diffusion is key," he said, thinking aloud. "Too bright and the sensor might still pick up the contrast. Too dim and we can't see what we're doing." "Exactly. It has to be perfect. Goldilocks illumination." Sarah stood, wiping sand from her hands. "We need to field test it. Tonight. Sector 7, where Davies died." "Tonight." Garrett's eyes widened. "Sarah, we've done one test." "One. We need more trials, more data." "We don't have time." She turned to face him, and her voice carried the weight of every name on every casualty report she'd signed. "The invasion is coming, Thomas. Churchill's meeting with Eisenhower next week. The beaches have to be clear. Every day we wait, more men die." Garrett looked at the mine, then at the lantern, then back at Sarah. He'd seen a lot of brave things in this war. A lot of stupid things, too. Sometimes they were the same thing. "I'll get a squad together," he said finally. "But I'm coming with you. And if this goes wrong, I'm writing the report. I won't have your name dragged through the mud because of my cowardice." "It's not going to go wrong." "You can't promise that." "No," Sarah admitted. "But I can promise that if we don't try, more men will die tomorrow. And the day after. And every day until someone figures out how to beat these damn mines." The beach at Sector 7 was a graveyard waiting to happen. They arrived at 2,300 hours, under a moonless sky that turned the channel into liquid ink. The tide was out, exposing 200 yards of sand that intelligence estimated held at least 40 mines. Teller mines, S-mines, maybe worse. The Germans had been busy. Sarah's team consisted of 6 people: herself, Garrett, 2 bomb disposal specialists named Fletcher and Price, and 2 combat engineers who'd volunteered, or been volunteered, for what everyone was calling the Ghostlight operation. Each of them carried a modified lantern. Sarah had spent the afternoon building 5 more units, working with a speed born of desperation and too much caffeine. They weren't perfect, but they'd have to do. "Remember," Sarah said, her voice low, "slow and steady. Place the lantern first. Let it sit for 30 seconds before you start excavating. No sudden movements. No shadows. If you see anything that looks wrong, any wire, any trigger mechanism you're not familiar with, you freeze and call me." "Understood." 5 voices murmured agreement. "And if one goes off," Garrett added grimly, "the rest of us hit the deck and pray the shrapnel pattern is merciful." They spread out across the beach in a line, 20 yards between each person. Sarah took the center position, with Garrett to her left and Fletcher to her right. The sound of waves filled the darkness, rhythmic and indifferent to the dance with death about to begin. Sarah knelt in the sand and activated her lantern. The diffused light spilled outward, creating a perfect circle of illumination that seemed to glow from within the earth itself. Ghost light, Garrett had called it. An apt name. The metal detector's probe slid through sand until it found something solid. Beep. Steady, insistent. Contact. "Mine here," Sarah called out. "Beginning excavation." Her hands moved with practiced precision, removing sand in careful handfuls. The lantern's glow remained constant above her, turning the work area into a bubble of light in an ocean of darkness. To her left, she could hear Garrett beginning his own excavation. To her right, Fletcher worked in silence. The edge of the mine appeared. Steel. German markings. A Teller mine, just as she'd expected. Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears, but her hands remained steady. More sand. More exposure. The pressure plate emerged, still buried in sand that could betray her with a single wrong move. 30 pounds of pressure, she reminded herself. Just 30 pounds. She worked around the edges, creating a moat of cleared sand. The lantern's light penetrated down, bathing the mine in that constant, unwavering glow. No spikes. No shadows. Just steady illumination that fooled the sensors into thinking nothing had changed. "First mine exposed," she announced. "Preparing to extract fuse." "Copy that," Garrett's voice came back. "I've got 2 here. Tandem placement. Beginning work on number 1. Sarah's fingers found the fuse housing, a cylindrical protrusion on the mine's underside. This was the moment of truth. If her theory was wrong, if the sensor detected the movement of her hands as a shadow, if the diffusion wasn't perfect, the fuse came free with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Sarah held her breath. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing. "Fuse removed," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Mine is safe." From up and down the line, voices began reporting in. Fletcher had extracted his first fuse. Price was working on her second mine. The combat engineers were moving methodically, following the protocol Sarah had drilled into them. But Garrett had gone silent. "Thomas." Sarah called out. "Status." No response. She looked left, toward his position. His lantern still glowed, but she couldn't see him behind the dome of light. "Thomas, report. I've got a problem." His voice was tight, controlled, but Sarah could hear the fear underneath. "The second mine, it's not a Teller. It's an S-mine. And it's rigged with a tripwire I almost missed." S-mines. The shrapnel mine. The Germans called them bouncing Bettys because of how they killed. Pressure trigger launches the mine 3 feet into the air, where it detonates and sprays ball bearings in a 360-degree radius. Designed specifically to maximize casualties, to shred human flesh at waist height. Sarah abandoned her position and moved toward Garrett, staying low. "Don't move. I'm coming to you." "Sarah, no. I said don't move." She crawled across the sand, her own lantern left behind, until she could see Garrett's situation. He was frozen in a kneeling position, both hands in the sand, his body perfectly still. In the glow of his ghost light, she could see what had him paralyzed. A thin wire, barely visible, running from the S-mine's fuse to a stake driven into the sand 6 feet away. A fail-safe. If the mine was disturbed, if the pressure fuse didn't trigger, the tripwire would. "I've got sand on my hands," Garrett said quietly. "If I move them to clear the wire, the weight shift might trigger the pressure plate. If I don't move them, I can't disarm it." Sarah studied the setup, her mind racing through options. The tripwire was taut, under tension. Cutting it would release that tension and likely trigger the mine. Leaving it meant Garrett was stuck in position until what? Until his muscles gave out? Until dawn brought German spotters who'd see them exposed on the beach? "The light," she said suddenly. "We need more light. If we can get another lantern positioned to give me a better angle." "There's no time for that," Garrett interrupted. "My legs are cramping. I've got maybe 5 minutes before I fall, and when I fall, this thing goes off." Sarah's jaw tightened. She looked at the mine, at the wire, at Garrett's hands buried in sand. "Then I'm cutting the wire," she said. "Sarah." "I'm going to cut it at the exact moment you lift your hands. The weight release and the tension release will happen simultaneously. They'll cancel each other out. That's insane. The timing would have to be perfect. Then we'll make it perfect." She pulled out her utility knife, the blade catching the lantern's glow. "On my count. 3, 2. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of salt and cordite. Somewhere out in the channel, a patrol boat's engine rumbled. The war continued, indifferent to the drama playing out on this small patch of beach. 1. Sarah cut the wire at the exact instant Garrett pulled his hands free, both of them throwing themselves backward, hitting the sand hard, waiting for the explosion that would end everything. Silence. The mine sat undisturbed, its deadly mechanism confused by the perfect synchronization of opposing forces. 4-5 heartbeats. Neither of them moved. Then Garrett started laughing, a wild, slightly hysterical sound that bubbled up from somewhere deep. "You're completely mad," he gasped. "Brilliant. But completely mad." Sarah lay on her back, staring up at the starless sky, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Did it work? We're alive, aren't we?" "That's not the same thing as it working." But it had worked. The ghostlight technique worked, and now they had proof, not just in a safe workshop, but here in the field with real mines and real stakes. They cleared 18 mines that night. 18 death traps rendered harmless by Sarah's improvised lanterns and steady hands. When they trudged back to base at 0400 hours, exhausted and covered in sand, Commander Phillips was waiting with hot coffee and expressions that said he'd expected to be writing condolence letters instead of debriefing reports. 18, he said, staring at the tally sheet Sarah handed him. 18 in one night. Without a single casualty. "The technique works," Sarah confirmed. "We'll need to manufacture more lanterns. Train more teams. We have maybe a month before." "Before the invasion," Phillips finished. "I know. I've already contacted supply. They're putting in a priority order for materials. By next week, you'll have enough equipment to outfit 20 teams." Sarah nodded, feeling the exhaustion finally catching up with her. "Good. That's good. Lieutenant Barnett?" Phillips's voice stopped her as she turned to leave. "That was remarkable work tonight. Truly remarkable." She managed a tired smile. "Tell that to Corporal Davies's family." The smile faded from Phillips's face. "I will. And I'll tell them that because of you, fewer families will get the telegram. Fewer wives will become widows. Fewer children will grow up without fathers." Sarah said nothing. There was nothing to say. The war would take what it wanted regardless. But maybe, Just maybe, she'd found a way to make it work a little harder for every life it claimed. The mines were just the beginning. The real test was still ahead. May 1944. The English Channel churned with activity that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago. Sarah Barnett stood on the deck of Landing Craft Infantry 517, watching the French coastline materialize through morning mist like something from a fever dream. Behind her, in the belly of the craft, 18 sappers sat in silence, each holding one of her ghost light lanterns. They'd trained for this moment through rain and cold and sleepless nights, practicing on dummy mines until the movements became muscle memory. Now the training was over. This wasn't D-Day, that was still weeks away, shrouded in secrecy so deep that even Churchill allegedly whispered the plans to himself. This was a reconnaissance mission, a probe against Rommel's Atlantic Wall to test German defenses and, more importantly, to clear a section of beach using Sarah's technique under actual combat conditions. 5 minutes! The boat captain shouted over the engine noise. 5 minutes until they hit the beach. 5 minutes until they discovered whether Sarah's ghost lights could work under fire. Beside her, Garrett checked his equipment for the 10th time. His hands moved with automatic precision, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. They'd cleared over 300 mines in the past 6 weeks using her method, but always at night, always behind British lines, always with the luxury of time and relative safety. This would be different. "You don't have to come," Sarah said quietly. "I can lead the team." "Shut up, Lieutenant." But Garrett's voice held affection beneath the gruffness. "Besides, if you die, who's going to tell the story of the mad woman who defeated the Wehrmacht with a lantern and too much stubbornness?" The landing craft's ramp dropped with a metallic shriek, and suddenly the world was chaos. Machine gun fire stitched across the water, sending up geysers of spray. Somewhere to their right, an 88mm gun boomed, and an LCI 300 yards away disappeared in a tower of flame and shrapnel. The beach ahead was obscured by smoke, but Sarah could see the obstacles. Czech hedgehogs, steel tetrahedrons designed to rip the bottom out of landing craft, and beyond them, the mines. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Buried in sand, hidden under seaweed, waiting with patient malice. "Go! Go! Go!" The captain was screaming now, and the sappers were moving, splashing through waist-deep water, each one carrying their lantern in waterproof casings strapped to their backs. Sarah hit the water and immediately went under, the weight of her equipment dragging her down. Strong hands grabbed her collar. Garrett, pulling her up, dragging her forward through the surf. Bullets snapped overhead, impossibly fast, impossibly close. They made the beach. Fletcher went down first, catching a machine gun burst across his chest. He fell face-first into the sand, his lantern rolling away, its diffused light still glowing through waterproof glass. Price screamed something Sarah couldn't hear over the roar of artillery. The world had become nothing but noise and terror and the certainty that she was going to die here, on this anonymous strip of French beach, without ever knowing if her invention would work when it mattered most. But training took over. "Spread out!" Sarah screamed. "Protocol Delta! Move!" The sappers dispersed, each seeking cover behind the scattered debris of previous assaults, broken concrete, wrecked machinery, the burned-out hulk of a Sherman tank from some earlier probe. The machine gun fire was coming from a bunker 300 yards inland, a concrete pillbox that commanded a perfect field of fire across the entire beach. "We can't work in this," Price shouted, huddled behind a chunk of shattered seawall. Blood streamed from a gash above her eye. "We're pinned down." "The smoke!" Garrett pointed to canisters on their belts. "Pop smoke and work in the cover." It was desperate, improvised, nothing like the careful protocols they'd practiced. But warfare was the art of adapting or dying. Purple smoke began billowing across the beach as sappers triggered their canisters. The smoke wouldn't stop bullets, but it would obscure visibility, give them precious seconds. Sarah activated her lantern, the familiar diffused glow seeming pathetically fragile against the violence surrounding them. The metal detector's probe found contact almost immediately. A mine, exactly where intelligence had predicted. She knelt in the sand, working by feel as much as sight, the smoke making her ghostlight technique even more critical. The constant illumination cut through the haze when vision failed. Sand came away in handfuls. The familiar shape of a teller mine emerged. But something was different. There was another shape beneath it, a cylinder connected by wires. Daisy chain. Sarah shouted. They're linked. One mine triggers the next. It was brilliant, in a horrible way. Clear one mine and you detonate the others, creating a cascade of explosions that would vaporize everything in a 50-yard radius. Rommel's engineers had adapted, found a counter to the standard defusing techniques. But they hadn't counted on the ghost lights. Sarah traced the wire to the secondary mine, positioned her lantern between both devices, and began the delicate process of disconnecting the link. Her hands moved with steady precision despite the artillery rounds that kept landing closer, despite the screams of wounded men, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. The wire came free. Both mines sat exposed, bathed in constant light, their sensors fooled into believing nothing had changed. First section clear. Sarah called out. Advance 20 yards and repeat. Around her, other sappers were working with the same focused intensity. Through the smoke and chaos, she could see ghost lights glowing like fireflies, each one marking a deadly trap being systematically dismantled. The technique worked. Even here, even under fire, even with the modifications the Germans had made, the constant light defeated the sensors. Mine after mine came up safely, creating a narrow corridor through the defensive belt. But the Germans weren't stupid. Sarah saw the mortar rounds arcing in before she heard them. Dark shapes against gray sky, falling with geometric precision. Someone in that bunker had realized what was happening and called in fire support. Incoming! The first round hit 30 yards away, showering them with sand and shrapnel. The second was closer. The third landed directly on top of Corporal Matthews, and where there had been a man there was suddenly just a crater and pieces. "Keep working!" Garrett was screaming. "We're almost through." Sarah's hands found another mine. Then another. She was moving on autopilot now, terror and training fused into something beyond fear. The ghost light glowed steady above her work, constant as a heartbeat, reliable as gravity. Then she found the one that would change everything. It wasn't buried like the others. It sat slightly elevated, positioned at the junction where 3 separate daisy chains converged. A master mine. One detonation here would trigger a cascade that would destroy the entire cleared corridor and kill everyone on the beach. And it was different from the others. Sarah's breath caught as she examined the device. The fuse housing was larger, more complex. Multiple wires led away in different directions. And there, stamped on the casing in German script, a designation she'd never seen before, Fernzunder 42. Remote detonator. Thomas. Her voice cracked with urgency. They can trigger this one remotely. If they realize what we're doing. Then work faster. Garrett was beside her suddenly, his own sector cleared. What do you need? Time. And luck. This thing has 3 separate trigger mechanisms. Pressure, light-sensitive, and radio-controlled. I have to disable all 3 simultaneously or... An explosion 30 yards to their left sent a column of sand and body parts into the air. Someone had gotten careless, or unlucky, or both. Sarah's hands were shaking now. She positioned the ghost light directly over the mastermind, letting its constant glow do its work on the photosensitive trigger. The pressure trigger would have to wait until she'd traced every wire. But the radio detonator. I need you to create an electromagnetic pulse, she said. A what? Your radio battery. If we short-circuit it next to the radio receiver, it might generate enough interference to jam the signal. Might. Garrett stared at her. That's the plan. Might? You have a better one? He didn't. Neither of them did. This was improvisation at its most desperate, the kind of solution you reached for when death was certain and any chance was better than none. Sarah traced the wires with shaking fingers, identifying the network of connections that made this device so deadly. The ghost light's glow illuminated her work, steady and unwavering even as mortar rounds continued to fall around them. "On 3, she said. "You short the battery. I cut the wires. We both pray." "I'm not a praying man." "Then start learning." 1. Another explosion. Closer. Sarah could feel the heat of it on her face. 2. Machine gun fire raked across their position, forcing them to press flat against the sand. A tracer round passed so close to Sarah's head that she could feel the heat of its passage. 3. Garrett jammed 2 wires into his radio battery. The device sparked, smoked, and died. In the same instant, Sarah cut through the pressure trigger wires with wire cutters, then reached for the fuse housing itself. Her hand slipped. The fuse housing shifted, and for one crystalline moment of absolute clarity, Sarah knew she was dead. The pressure plate would register the change, the detonator would trigger, and 11 pounds of TNT would erase her and Garrett and everyone within 50 yards. But the ghost light's glow remained constant. The sensor, bathed in unwavering illumination from the moment they'd started work, detected no change. No spike. No shadow. The fuse housing settled into its new position, and the mine remained inert. Sarah sat back on her heels, her entire body shaking. Garrett was staring at her with wide eyes, his face pale beneath the grime and smoke. "Did that just—" he started. "Yes. And we're not." "No. Bloody hell." Sarah forced herself to move, to finish the job. The mastermind came up clean, its 3 trigger mechanisms defeated by a combination of steady light, electromagnetic interference, and sheer desperate luck. Around them, other sappers were reporting clear sections. "Last mine disabled." Price called out. "Corridor is clear." "Repeat, corridor is clear." The words echoed across the beach, cutting through the chaos. The corridor was clear. 60 yards of minefield, neutralized. Enough space for landing craft to beach safely, for troops to advance without being blown apart by buried death. But the price had been steep. Sarah counted bodies as they fell back toward the water. Fletcher. Matthews. Corporal Young. Private Davies. No relation to the other Davies, but dead just the same. 7 men in total, out of 18 who'd landed. The extraction boats were coming in, engines roaring, their hulls scarred with bullet holes. Garrett grabbed Sarah's arm and hauled her toward the water, but she pulled free, running back toward Fletcher's body. His ghost light was still there, still glowing steady and true beside his corpse. Sarah grabbed it, cradling the device against her chest as she ran. Behind her, the beach was burning, smoke rising in thick columns. The bunker's machine gun was still firing, still killing, indifferent to the small victory they'd won. They tumbled into the extraction boat in a chaos of wounded and exhausted humanity. The ramp came up and they were moving, engines screaming, pulling away from that hellish beach. Sarah slumped against the hull, Fletcher's lantern still clutched in her hands. "Did we get what we needed?" she asked Garrett. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears, distant and hollow. "Intelligence says yes. The corridor's mapped. We know the density, the placement, the types. When D-Day comes, the engineers will know exactly what they're facing." He paused. "And they'll have your ghost lights." Sarah looked down at the lantern. Its diffused glow seemed gentler now, almost kind. A simple device, metal and wire and a handful of light bulbs. But it had worked. Against all odds, against German engineering, against the Atlantic Wall itself, it had worked. 7 men, she whispered. 7 men dead so that thousands might live, Garrett said quietly. That's the arithmetic of war. You didn't create it. You just made the numbers a little less horrific. The French coast receded behind them, and the English Channel embraced them with its cold, indifferent waves. Somewhere ahead, England waited. Somewhere beyond that, an invasion was being planned. And somewhere in a warehouse in Dover, workers were manufacturing more ghost lights, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, preparing for the day when tens of thousands of men would storm those beaches and need every advantage science and desperation could provide. Sarah closed her eyes and tried not to think about Fletcher's children, or Matthew's wife, or the 7 families who would receive telegrams that began with "We regret to inform you." The war had taken its payment. But for the first time, Sarah had made it pay more than it was worth. The real invasion was coming. And when it came, her lights would be there.